But I'm glad that Sergio had that moment. But it looked a little dicey there at the end of the race. What did you guys make of how things played out between the two teammates late?
Well, I think I'm surprised that Checo is surprised when Max isn't listening to the team. I feel like that's kind of the vibe he gave at the end of the race. And I feel like just kind of someone needs to kind of shake him and be like, do you not remember what happened in Brazil last year? Like, I think if it's a really interesting position we're in this season where clearly Perez is going to be Max's only championship challenger this year. So what Perez needs to be doing is he needs to be looking at what Rosberg did in 14 and 16 to get under Hamilton's skin. And a lot of that was about just playing the game in the same way Hamilton played it, and I think it's a bit of a different situation in the fact that Perez is probably much easier for Red Bull just to kind of drop if things get really bad than Verstappen. They're never going to turn around really to Verstappen and say, we're actually getting rid of you on the back of this. But I think Perez just needs to, if the team's telling him something, he's got to almost treat some of it with an air of not mistrust maybe, but he's just got to say, all right, well, but I also need to get these fastest laps. If he backs himself to get them, he should go do it. And I think that's what Max was doing. So I think that it'll be interesting to see if that happens again. Because again, I don't think there's going to be many instances where we see Checo in front of Max, this season. So it was interesting when it did happen that Max was still able to kind of steal that lap from him. And I was hoping Perez would kind of just be like, no, I'm doing my own lap times. You guys sort it out yourselves. Because clearly Max was like, when has Max ever listened to Red Bull kind of reining him in and telling him, this is what we want you to do? He's never done that. So for Perez to have expected that the messages he was getting, Max is going to be obeying them and listening to them in the same way. I think it's naive of him to have done that. If that's what happened, I don't know. But if it is what's happened, he needs to kind of, I think, reassess his mindset because he's not going to win a championship if he just says, right, this is what's happening. I trust Max is doing the same thing. We're all good, because it won't be. And he'll find out after the race.
Similarly to Otmar Safnauer, don't be naive. This is Fernando Alonso we're talking about. What has history told you about this person? Sergio Perez, exactly. What has history told you about your teammate?
Exactly.
This is where I think Max and Lewis are very similar. It was interesting listening to Lewis when I can't remember who said, George did well, you must be happy. It's like, great, that has nothing to do with me. And I think Max and Lewis are very similar. Just like, this has nothing to do, like what my teammate is doing right now has nothing to do with. I always love that Max is never happy that he's in second place. I don't think any driver is ever happy. And I again, we should not be surprised when Max says, yeah, I'm not happy with this. And people are like, you got second, what are you complaining about? Yeah, it's not first. Like that's what they're all there for.
But it's different.
And you got to remember as well, Max, the reason that he wasn't really at the front of the grid, and I think the reason he wasn't on pole position was because he had a drive shaft failure in qualifying, which, happens, okay? Drivers have to also accept that it's a team game. Like, they will occasionally let the team down, the team will occasionally let them down. But, I think in the back of his mind, he thought, I had the pace this weekend to win this race in a normal circumstance, and I haven't. And then as for the fastest lap thing, I mean, I listened back to Checo's radio comms over the last few laps, and he asked what the fastest time is, who has it, and he's told you have it, and the time that it was, which was a low 32. And then there was nothing more. So it wasn't, and we're sticking with that. Okay. So, I don't think at any point did Max necessarily break team orders. Christian, I mean, maybe he wouldn't admit it if Max had, but Christian didn't kind of give that indication either afterwards. I think Checo had kind of misunderstood the whole drive to a lap time now with you can't just have one go a fast lap at the end. The other interesting thing Christian Horner said was that he actually thought that Checo had attempted to go for a fast lap in the first two corners, made a slight mistake, and then realized that he wasn't going to be able to do it. So, I feel like Checo being unhappy about that, it was perhaps a lack of communication, something that Red Bull will need to work on. I remember Mercedes during their period of dominance with Hamilton and Rosberg, they had the rules of engagement, all these kind of ground rules of what you are allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do, where they draw the line. And even that ended up in tears on a number of occasions, most notably 2016 Spain. So, I think Red Bull need to probably go back at it and look at, as long as those two are actually fighting each other for wins, they need to go back and look at exactly what the rules are so that neither driver can get out and complain after the race.
And maybe Sergio Perez needs to ask a more pointed question of his his team. It's about the question and how you pose it to get the information that you want. Toni, I think it's interesting. I agree with you. Max Verstappen is the ultimate competitor. And so he's never going to be happy unless he's on top of the podium. Nico Rosberg, though, after the race, kind of criticized some of his comments and said he needed to be more gracious. Obviously, the team put together great results. What do you guys make of that? I mean, you cover Max more closely than obviously we do. Do you feel like he needed to be more gracious in that moment, or that is who he is and that's what makes him so great?
Also, coming from Nico Rosberg to tell someone to be more gracious, there's a level of irony there that is palpable. That's all I'll say on that one.
I think Tony's put that quite well. I don't know if there's ever been a genuinely gracious Formula One driver. And by that, I mean, the reason they're in that position is because they're all kind of wired to think I'm the best driver in the world. I should be winning. You know, some of them deal with it better than others, I think. But I think it's interesting, isn't it, how similar Max and Lewis actually are. I think that's why 21 was so good, because they were so similar in different ways, if that makes sense. Like the similar traits they have play out in different ways. And Tony's right. Like the way neither of them are happy with first, but they're not happy with anything other than first, but they're unhappy with it in a different way. If you compare when Charles Leclerc finishes second, for example, he's unhappy to finish second, but you feel like it's a different type of feeling about it. He's more like, oh, I should be first, I should have won, blah blah blah. Max and Lewis would be like, it's a travesty I'm not first. It's the worst thing that's ever happened. I'm not gonna rest until we've put this right. And there's like it's like it's built in them deep. So I don't think you can be gracious if that's your mindset. I don't think Schumacher was particularly gracious. I don't think Vettel was when they were winning, or at least you don't give off that. You don't give off a gracious air because you're winning so much. So and yeah, for it to come to Rosberg, just to go back to Tony's point, is great. Because he was not that.
I will say this: the last 2 years of Formula One have given us some of the best memes I've ever seen in sports, and I don't watch many other sports, but I just feel like we're in the memification right now of Formula One. But the drivers and the context keep giving us these moments where I'm just like, good God, you couldn't make this up even if you tried.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube, and for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app, and for premium content plus live streaming, make sure to subscribe to ESPN Player.